All right, all that all that was for free. The ironic connection that I see between um, Galileo and Darwin is the following. The same resistance, vindictiveness, hostility, and willful blindness that Galileo encountered from the Catholic Church when he presented his conclusions is the exact same vindictiveness, resistance, and hostility and willful blindness that anyone will receive should they mention an idea that's contrary to the Darwinian paradigm. But the irony that I see is that that resistance will not come from a religious institution. That resistance will come from a secular institution. So let's break this down. How did we get here is kind of the big question that I'm addressing right here. When Galileo presented his conclusions, the Catholic Church had a monopoly on just about every realm of human thought. They had a monopoly on scientific truth. They had a monopoly on political power. They had a monopoly on philosophical ideas and the ultimate nature of reality. They had all kinds of monopolies that they had gathered. They had assumed to be the sole arbiters of every type of truth available to humanity. So when Galileo presented his findings, they went contrary to a creed or a doctrine that had been built up within the church. Not specifically stated in Scripture, but something that was an ipso facto or a de facto. I always get those confused. But anyhow, it was the idea that the Catholic Church, since they understood that humanity was central to God's redemptive purposes, therefore, it goes without saying, it's obvious, that the Earth must be central to the solar system. And I mean, we have to remember how counterintuitive Galileo's ideas were. I mean, we seem to forget that we wake up every morning and the sun's over here, we go to bed at night and the sun's over here. Moon, stars, everything's doing the same thing. It's all giving the appearance of traveling around the Earth. So Galileo's ideas were counterintuitive, and it took us a long time to get to the point where we even had the math to explore Galileo's ideas. But anyhow, Galileo's ideas, because they're in the realm of the empirical and can be testable and provable and all the rest, they won the day. They achieved that level of 100% certainty, and at some point in the past, and I don't know where this was or when, at some point the church had to say, all right, time out here. We screwed up. Our bad. You're right, we're wrong. Now, Darwin, on the other hand, when his ideas were deposited into society, one of the things you have to understand is that his ideas got deposited into a society that had been shifting away from these Catholic monopolies for centuries. In fact, Galileo represents one of these decouplings away from a Catholic monopoly on scientific thought. And there were several going on at the time. There was a philosophical decoupling away from church doctrine and church dogma declaring the ultimate nature of reality. In that, for the father of Western philosophy, in fact, was a Catholic priest. This guy's name was René Descartes, and he said, "Time out here. I don't want the church dogma defining to me the ultimate nature of reality." And so he he came up with that famous saying that I think, therefore I am. And for him, that was a bedrock determination. That because I'm a cognizant, aware, self-conscious being, that I can determine what reality is. And, from Descartes, gives rise to the rationalists. And that's a whole branch of philosophy. So there was a philosophical decoupling away from the Catholic Church. You had the scientific decoupling. There was even a religious decoupling taking place. Christianity itself was redefining itself. And we have men like Luther and Calvin and the great reformers saying, time out here. There was so much corruption and political intrigue and in the Catholic Church that we needed a reformation. We needed to say, is this what Jesus was teaching us? Is this what the gospel's about? I mean, by the time we get to Luther and Calvin and the others, the Catholic Church was selling indulgences. This is where you could you could buy forgiveness for a sin that you wanted to commit in the future. So you wanted to rape a virgin, contribute to the building campaign. Or you wanted to murder somebody. Well, it would probably cost a little bit more, but yeah, we'll forgive you for that one too. So there was all this decoupling taking place from monopolies that the Catholic Church had owned for centuries upon centuries. And it's into this shifting, simmering stew that Darwin's ideas were deposited. And what had been a kind of a glacial, breaking away from Catholic monopolies suddenly became, a seismic shift. It's impossible to quantify how powerful Darwin's ideas were when they were deposited into this context. Something seriously shifted. His ideas acted like a catalyst to society. And, what had been a trickle now became like a raging torrent, a flash flood of change in society. And we're still on that trajectory. We are still on that shift. And there was a societal rush to judgment that was about 100 years premature. And I'll get to what I mean by that in a little bit. But there was a societal rush to judgment that took place, and people were jumping on board Darwin's bandwagon like there was no tomorrow. I mean, powerful, influential people were jumping on board evolution's theory or Darwin's theory like crazy. I mean, but why? Did they find the missing link? Was it some overwhelming bit of evidence that they found and forgot to tell us about? No, there was, people wanted this to be true. It was cutting edge, and this has always been a powerful motivator in humanity anyhow, but being on the cutting edge of something so controversial and trendy. There was that, I'm sure that was part of the motive for what happened, but we had like game changers jumping on board Darwin's bandwagon. I mean, one of the game changers was a guy named Aldous Huxley, and you're familiar with him. If you went to high school, you had to read his books. But this guy became a fanatical Darwinist. I mean, just a radical, and he would argue and debate with anybody who would contradict evolution. In fact, he became known as Darwin's bulldog, and he was just a loudmouth guy that wanted to take down anyone that, of course, we're talking about religious people. But what happened? What was that convinced Aldous Huxley that Darwinism was correct? Was it some fossil that showed up? No. One of the things you have to know about Aldous Huxley is that he was a Fabian socialist. And here's one of those terms that you can go ahead and look up. You need to look up because Fabian socialism is alive and well, and I can prove it in 2 words: Obamacare. Now, I don't want to get into an Obamacare rant, but let me just take a time out here in a parentheses, and let me just throw in a commercial. it's my opinion that if we don't uproot this weed called Obamacare soon, then we're in real trouble, because I believe what is going to take place, what Obamacare will look like in the coming years, is that you and your doctor will no longer be the only ones making decisions about your health care. Now, there's going to be a third party involved now. It's going to be some pencil-necked, bow-tied, pocket-protected IRS agent clicking off tick marks on a computer screen who's going to be involved in your decision. And maybe he doesn't like what you say on your Facebook page about the present administration. So, sorry, click no. Or maybe you're just too old. Maybe the resources that you require for survival could be better used on a younger, more productive member of society. Click no. It's just a guess. I hope it doesn't come to that. But Obamacare is, talk about another Fabian socialist, George Orwell. Obamacare is Orwellian doublespeak for Obama don't care. And I hope we get this reversed, but I believe we're going to see just how heartless this system is. Anyhow, that's my back to topic. What happened in Aldous Huxley's mind to convince him so powerfully of the truth of Darwinism? Well, like I said, he was a Fabian socialist, and one of the things you need to understand about Fabian socialism is these guys really want a one-world government ruled by the enlightened elite, administrated by a ubiquitous bureaucracy that is cradle to grave, Obamacare, that touches and governs every aspect of your life, and is enforced by the power of the gun. I mean, it sounds wonderful, doesn't it? It sounds like utopian dream to me. But the Fabian socialist differs from the communist not in their ends, because the communist is after the same objective. The difference between Fabian socialism and communism is the means, where the communist prefers the direct approach of revolution, blood in the street, rioting, anarchy, military overthrow, taking power because you have it and you can. The Fabian socialist prefers a much more subtle approach to their goals. They prefer slow, gradual, barely perceptible changes over long periods of time to achieve their goal. They're much more interested in the frog slowly being cooked. By the time you realize the water's hot, it's too late. You're already cooked. So, is it any wonder that Huxley became a Darwinist? He understood that Fabian socialism was Darwinism in human politics. He didn't need any proof. It was true. He could feel it in his bones. It was the perfect format for him. It was an overlap. You know, he saw that his objectives could be achieved through a Darwinian means. So, you know, these powerful people, and Huxley was just one of them, they took their institutions and their influence with them. And so now what we have in present society is we have an embedded philosophy that is thoroughly entrenched in the education system. It's thoroughly entrenched in politics. And it's thoroughly entrenched in Hollywood, which, if you're not aware, is the new education system. So, when somebody comes along and contradicts Darwin's paradigm in today's context, they're going to encounter the same resistance that Galileo encountered when the Catholic Church had the monopolies on power. We're just up against a secular power structure as opposed to a religious power structure. And that's, for me, where the ironic connection takes place. It's not so much between Galileo and Darwin, but the ironic connection for me is in the power structures external to Galileo and the power structures that have developed external to Darwin's ideas. The blinders have switched hands. Where the blinders were once worn by the Catholic Church, now these blinders are in place in these secular institutions. Allow me to introduce you to today's equivalent of Galileo. There are many by now, but the first one I became aware of is a guy named Michael Behe. Now, Michael Behe was educated a Darwinist, went to college as a Darwinist, went to, professorship and doctorates as a Darwinist, became a professor, and for 10 years studied a tiny little sliver of a microbe, the tiniest life form on the planet, a bacteria. And for 10 years, satisfied as a Darwinist, studying a flagellar motor. And he starts to realize that what he's looking at is a system that's irreducibly complex. That every single part of a flagellar motor is ordered and is put in place in sequence, just like we manufacture a motor for a car. Every part is put into place in exact sequence and in exact order along this assembly line so that we can have a working motor at the end of the assembly line. He realized the same exact thing is taking place with these flagellar motors. We're not even talking about the whole organism. We're just talking about its system of locomotion. And these motors were made up of 30, 35 parts. And everything had to be exact. And what he realized is he was looking at an irreducibly complex system. And what he means by that is that you can't remove one part. And these parts had everything that we can identify as engineers in the human race. They had propellers, and stators, and rotors, and power systems, and all these parts that we would understand and identify this flagellar motor had. And you can't take one part away and have a working system. And use the analogy of a mousetrap. A mousetrap is made up of, you got your platform, you've got your your little guillotine device. You've got the spring that energizes the snap thing. You've got a catch that is attached to a little platform where you put the peanut butter, and you've got 5 or 6 parts that if you took one part away, it's not like you're going to catch 20% less mice. You're going to catch 0 mice because what you have is a broken mousetrap. A mousetrap is an irreducibly complex system. And so are these flagellar motors. He realized that these things, you can't take one single part away from this thing and have a working motor. It's not going to work at 80% efficiency if you take a couple parts away. It's going to be broken, and that organism is going to be dead, literally in the water, and unable to continue its species, to pass on its genetic information to the next generation. So he's like, well, how could this possibly happen through Darwinian means, which requires slow, gradual change over long periods of time? And he's going, well, wait, we need to rethink some things. And for the outrage, the absolute outrage of suggesting that maybe Darwin's theory needs to be rethought, he got ostracized. If he wasn't a tenured professor, he would have been kicked out. He would have been fired. Oh my gosh, we can't question Darwin. What are you doing? Really? It's amazing what state of affairs that we don't have the freedom of thought to challenge a guy who lived 150 years ago. Anyhow, the irony is complete. We've come full circle. The blinders have changed hands from a religious institution to a secular institution, and God forbid you should come up with an idea that challenges Darwin's theory. And here's frosting on the cake. the beautiful cherry on top is wonderful. Is the Catholic Church has switched teams. They've come over to evolution. It's like, come on, you guys, hang tough. you know, they've come over to evolution. It's like they're scrambling to get on board the Titanic. You know, they want a berth on board this sinking ship. They should have stayed tough. They should have stayed tight, man. Because anyhow, that's the ironic connection that I see between Galileo and Darwin.